Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. Welcome to all of yourself, including your hopes and your fears, your joys, and maybe your doubts too. All that you bring, all of who you are, enriches our gathering and our process here today. Some of us are here in the church, but every one of us is here in person and in spirit. We say welcome to your joy, to your hope, and your pride. We say welcome even to your grief, your fear, or your anger. And the parts of you that may not even feel ready to be seen and heard, welcome to those parts as well, for we are people of confidence. We feel confidence that our community is welcoming to all, confident that we are able to grow in the life of our community, confident in our willingness to learn and to try new things. We have faith in our capacity to know ourselves and each other ever deeply. Welcome to you who are human. Welcome to you who love and are loved. Welcome to you who are blessed, which is every one of us. May this time together be a blessing. We welcome you to our church today. We welcome you to our service. We welcome you with our hearts to yours. Good morning.
We light this chalice in honor of the history that holds and heals us, for the stories of heroism that inspire our own, for the faces of loved ones who have passed, in whose images we see our better selves, for reminders of those who paved the path on which we travel and blessed us with advantages we didn't earn all on our own. These memories do not live in the past. They carve the contours of our present. They throw themselves into our futures and lure us into building a life better for all. They are here today. Look, listen, let them in. May their light guide our way.
Thanks to Scotty for offering that chalice lighting. I invite you to light your chalice at home if you have one. Tom Wernick has lit the chalice here at UUCM. And thank you to whoever it was that gave us the reminder to turn off our devices. I forgot to make that announcement. Out of practice. With the national holiday of Thanksgiving coming up this week, I invite each of us to approach the holiday with heart and humility and care. As you may know, some Indigenous people in this nation mark the day as a national day of mourning to acknowledge and honor and address the painful legacies connected to the arrival of Europeans. I expect to say more about those layered origins of Thanksgiving actually next Sunday. And today I simply want to name that while those pilgrims in the 1600s, who are our direct theological ancestors, that they arrived with a tradition of a secular fall harvest festival. And that's what was celebrated back when, a secular festival. The native people of this land, however, celebrated thanks and gratitude as a very sacred necessity every single day, in order to be in right relationship with all that is, in order to be in and honor a relationship of reciprocity. So I encourage each of us to focus on that sense of consistent gratitude, even as we seek to acknowledge for ourselves that there's a history and a legacy for us to relearn in some ways and take in and find a way to move forward with. I encourage each of us to let our own growing awareness of those histories and the lived experiences of Indigenous people and our own love and care for the Native people in our life in particular, to allow us to hold the pain and the tragedy and the harm connected to our nation's attempt to exterminate Indigenous people truly, and at the same time, to hold the warmth and care and love and gratitude and the potential healing that we associate with Thanksgiving Day. To try to do both of those things. And as part of that, I invite you to offer a land acknowledgement at your main meal on Thursday, if not every day, whether you eat alone or with others, whether you create your own heart-centered acknowledgement of the people and the history, or you draw on this evolving acknowledgement that's crafted by Shelley Covert with the blessing of the local Nisenan elders. You can look for it in this week's e-chalice if you don't have it, or on the website under the Nisenan Task Force page. Right now, I invite Jenny Dewey to offer this land acknowledgement that is at once familiar, but in some ways new all the time.
Good morning. In our commitment to be in right relationship with the descendants of this area's indigenous people, we place a small basket of black oak acorns on our altar each week. In doing so, we acknowledge the Nisenan people are still here among us today, though nearly invisible after generations of erasure and exclusion from California's history. We understand we are on Nisenan land that was never ceded, and the original tribal families have yet to recover from the genocide of their people. As residents or visitors in Nisenan land, we support the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe in efforts to stabilize their people, as well as the campaign to restore tribal sovereignty through federal recognition.
Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion, and compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space, present to the beloved companions who move beside us. Come into this space, mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space and let us worship.
Well, good morning again. I'm here now to tell a very personal wisdom story for all ages, and I hope you will find some wisdom in it. And this comes in the context of our November theme of holding history. And I will start immodestly by stating my full name. My full name, which I carry like a trunk full of ancient clothes, is Charles Davenport Champlin, Jr. IV. I am the fourth Charles Davenport Champlin, and the first son of a Charles Davenport Champlin, who was, of course, the third, my father. And my father, Charles Davenport Champlin III, had a wonderful career as a journalist with Time Life magazines, and then with the Los Angeles Times as arts editor and a film critic. He had a friendly relationship with celebrities like George Lucas and Meryl Streep, and interviewed many of them in the 80s and 90s on his Bravo television show. And this photo of me and my father was taken by a very famous photographer who photographed celebrities around the world, and he thought that he would be honored, and he probably was, to be photographing my dad. But my father was also a man deeply wedded to his own history, rooted in a small town called Hammondsport in the wine country of western New York State at the bottom of Keuka Lake among New York's Finger Lakes. In that town, my great-great-grandfather, Charles Davenport Champlin I, was a founder in 1860 of the Pleasant Valley Wine Company, which still exists today in Hammondsport. It claims status as the first bonded winery in the United States and survived the decade of Prohibition by making sacramental wine and teaching locals new uses for their bathtubs as well. Well, my father was born in Hammondsport in 1926 and gave tours of the family winery during his high school and college days. At 12 years old, though, his father, Francis Malburn Champlin, died, we presume of cancer probably. By the time my dad went off to World War II and was wounded in Belgium in 1944, his mother was remarried to a man named Charles Haynes, who encouraged my aspiring writer father to attend Harvard, which he did. And instead of coming back to work at the small local paper, which he might have expected to do, instead he was recruited away from Harvard to work at Time and Life magazines and began a significant career that took him to stations in New York, Chicago, where I was born, Los Angeles, and finally on to London, after which he joined then the Los Angeles Times as arts editor in 1965. But like many small-town natives, my dad never forgot his roots. In fact, visiting Hammondsport after the war, his grandmother introduced him to a pretty lady in the town library who became his wife and the mother of me and my 5 siblings. And virtually every summer for my first 10 years, and often again in later years too, our family would vacation by Keuka Lake, where my mother's family also had a lakeside cottage. Then in my dad's later career, with memories still powerful, my dad memorialized his small-town boyhood in a book he called Back There, Where the Past Was, still emotional to me. Holding history has been our theme in this month of November, and we all have our back theres, even if they are perhaps still right close by you. And my father died in 2014, but his historical affections still affect me. His ashes currently reside with my 96-year-old mother, where she still lives in Los Angeles. And it's possible one day they might both join other relatives in one of the Hammondsport memorial sites. For now, Mother treasures having my father's ashes with her. When I first met my wife, Leslie, she visited me and my family in Hammondsport as a teenager. And we are, of course, both now members of the church here. And she came to love that historical Hammondsport as much as I do and much as my family does. So it was simply amazing when she learned through her own research that some of her ancestors on her father's Randall side had also lived in Hammondsport in the 1800s. Those relatives had actually worked in the Pleasant Valley Wine Company, and one of them was actually an official pallbearer at my great-great-grandfather's funeral in 1875. With that amazing historical coincidence coming to light, Leslie arranged for us both to visit Hammondsport this recent October, and we found just 2 blocks from the downtown that we had known together for 50 years, monuments to her own Randall ancestors, back also to the 1800s. How amazing it has been to find that our shared love of that town, of that meaningful past, was also a real and meaningful past for both Leslie and me. It has been a most surprising and meaningful gift to find that our histories intertwined more than we could ever have expected. So, back there where the past was, we all are there in some ways. Good morning to you.
Chuck, thank you for sharing that piece of the history that you hold and the piece that it turns out Leslie holds as well. Beautiful, thank you. I invite us, and people in the room have a chance to do it in a shared space, and people online have a chance to do it in another kind of shared space, but to once again pause, just stop everything else for a moment, and to listen within, to feel within, to look within, and to acknowledge and take stock of what's stirring there. Sometimes in the busyness of our week or the busyness inspired by our anxiousness, we don't always pay attention thoroughly. So I invite you to use this time to truly listen within for a few moments of silence that we hold together. The silence here holds the sound of traffic outside, sound of blocks inside. I know at home you have your own set of sounds that accompanies the silence. I invite you during the quiet music to be with what you hold, to listen perhaps for the answer that comes to your own questioning or your own prayers that arise. For those in the room, I invite you to come forward, to come around this way from the side, to place a stone in the bowl of water if you wish to acknowledge what you're holding. And I invite all of us to hold each other in the quiet tenderness of the music. I've placed stones for all that people might be typing into the chat online, for some of the people I know who are hurting and who are healing, for all that remains unnamed, a stone for those larger things. Pain around the acquittal, perhaps, after the shooting in Kenosha. Pain that may be very personal to you. Joy that may be also personal to you. We hold it all when we're together. Sometimes we find ways to share that. Invite us always to remember that we only ever know part of each other's stories. We are called to hold each other tenderly, always, even in the midst of heat. For our prayer and our meditation this morning, I offer the words of my colleague Karen Johnston, who speaks to the sense of our history, our ancestors, and to this moment. Ancestors who spoke with bravest fire, lend us your senses that we may know another world is on her way, breathed into life with our participation in her creation. Forebears who led the way where there was at first no way, lend us your persistence, your temerity, your assurance that the moral arc of the universe does indeed bend towards justice. Ones who went before us, sacrificing for a future not your own, help us to give of ourselves that the common stones in our hands today might be cathedrals of compassion today, halls of restorative justice tomorrow, sheltering walls of beloved community the day after that. It's Sunday morning, the day we gather. Let us be thankful and full of praise to be in the company of those who came before, yet are ever in our midst. To be in the company of one another. To be in our heart of hearts, in the company of those who aren't here. So may we be. Some of our religious ancestors who spoke with brave fire and who came before were Unitarians in Transylvania, which is where this stole is from. It's a Transylvanian stole. They were preaching a message of religious tolerance long before most places could hear it. The longtime director of music at the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Concord, Massachusetts, Elizabeth Norton, has traveled to Transylvania many times, often with the choir, to connect to our more religiously traditional Unitarian cousins there in Transylvania. On one trip, Beth was moved by the Transylvanian prayer she heard, and so she said it to the tune of a Transylvanian folk song, including in the song the prayer in both Hungarian and in English. Where there is faith, there is love. Where there is love, there is peace. Where there is peace, there is blessing. Where there is blessing, there is God. Where there is God, there is no need. I invite you to receive that prayer in the language of your own heart and your own theology.
Where there is faith, there is love. Where there is love, there is peace. Where there is peace, there is blessing. Where there is blessing, there is God. Where there is God, there is no need. All heat, all serretet, all serretet, all beke, all beke, all dodash, all dodash, all zisten, all isten, all zugsche, all isten, all zugsche,
Thank you, Tom and Jordan. On previous Sundays, I have named Jamie Wheal's claim that things right now are exponentially better and exponentially worse than they've ever been. Does that match your sense? I'm seeing some nods. In his latest work, Recapture the Rapture, Wheal writes that we human beings are traveling along two curves at once. A coming alive arc, he names one curve, an arc that started low and that has been curving upward toward personal fulfillment and cultural fulfillment, even for Black, Indigenous people of color at a prorated rate rather than full value. The coming alive arc, he says, is about maximizing choices and savoring the world on its way up. We've had more and more opportunity. And he says there's a staying alive arc. Staying alive, staying alive. An arc that he says is curving downward. Human hubris and willful ignorance exacerbating climate change, for example. Human discord, species extinction, political gridlock, sliding on a slippery slope toward hell and in a well-greased handbasket at that. So I'm curious, what would you say is better now than it's ever been? What's in that coming alive arc toward personal and cultural fulfillment? I'm going to grab my computer so I can read text, or read the chat too. So let's start with some folks in the room. What do you think is coming alive?
Some of us are more willing to see the true history.
More willing to see?
The true history of what we call civilization.
More of us are willing to see the true history of what we call civilization. Yeah. What else? What else? Megs.
Gay rights and recognition of cultural contributions.
Gay rights and recognition of cultural contributions. Julia's typed in the chat, awareness. Opportunity. There's so much access to information and possibility. So I love going on Google and finding the information that I need that actually helps me do all kinds of things internally as well as around the house. Young adults are a rising force, writes Martha, and Nancy writes, women's choices. Eileen says, learning to communicate without having and provoking defensiveness. Anything else anyone in the room wants to name? Shanti.
Many more opportunities for Native Americans and their tribes.
Many more opportunities for Native Americans and their tribes, says Shanti. More awareness of the environment. right? So our awareness is broadening, several themes there. What's been on that downward curve? What's perhaps worse than it's ever been? What's in that staying alive arc that we worry about? Jenny? Integrity. Gwen? Polarization. Gail? Gun violence. Stu? A mass acceptance of conspiracy theories. Carol? Species extinction. Destruction of the environment, says Linda. I think this is a positive one, that the Gen Y, millennials, and today's children are not having any of our generation's nonsense. Martha says apathy. Beth says gathering together, singing and hugging is one of those positive things. Other things that that you worry about that seem like inequity. Thank you. What Jamie Wheal says is that those two arcs, the coming alive arc and the staying alive arc, appear to be meeting, intersecting right now. One on its way up, one on its way down. The best of times and the worst of times so far. Way above the speed limit. It's traveling at, both of those, traveling at way above the speed limit that our biology posted. And it's getting faster by the moment as those two kind of crash into each other with no guarantee as to where things are going to go from here. It was E.O. Wilson who once said that we human beings have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. But he says we're not being helped really to figure out what to do with that set of things. And he says the significant thing is not only that we're having trouble keeping up with the world's changes, both in terms of depth and speed, but it's that in this clash we're experiencing a collapse of meaning altogether as those two hit. Even our most familiar and trusted landmarks can't tell us which way is up anymore, he writes. The anchors we used to hold on to have been collapsing for a long while and more quickly lately. It's part of that dissolving and the gooiness we've been experiencing. And that surfaces and makes it difficult to answer the thorny questions we've been holding. Wheal says that for centuries, human beings found primary meaning and comfort through organized religion, through the promise of and the trust in salvation for those who are in the know and in the right group, right, who hold the right beliefs. Those who believed would be offered salvation, the good life in the end. And those who didn't believe or follow, not so much. Religion offered salvation and a great deal of powerful human bonding and support. But it couched that support in a realm of exclusion. There's us, and then there are the others. Meaning 1.1, Wheal calls it. But in a way that may mirror your own spiritual journey, it certainly does for me, that exclusion began to chafe. Felt too small for some people from the very beginning and for a critical mass later on, kind of pushing against the limits of that exclusion, which felt too constricting. And informed by our growing awareness and knowledge, we've been trying a different experiment, he says, for the past few hundred years. One based not on salvation for the few, but on trying to increase inclusion. Think enlightenment, think movement towards civil rights, democracy. This was the promise of liberalism, he says, of classical liberalism, the belief that free markets, civil rights, democracy are kinds of things that will usher in an era of equality and prosperity into a world where everyone, not just the elect, will be entitled to a fair shot at the good life. Those are values we recognize from our lifetimes, true, and have been central to Unitarian Universalism and Unitarianism before. But that liberalism isn't turning out so well either, as you know. Its shortcomings are becoming more and more clear. Economic disparity, concentrating extraordinary wealth and economic power in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals. One of the most recent capturings of that was that right now, the top 1% of people who have personal wealth in the world own just over 43% of the world's personal wealth, starting to approach half. 1% owns half of the wealth. And the half of the population that has the least, altogether, that whole bottom half, has 1% of personal wealth in the world. The daily news shines light behind the illusions of equality and justice and equal opportunity. Trust in government and institutions is fading. Racism doubles down, even as people grow in awareness of Black, brown, and indigenous peoples' truths. Power remains concentrated in the hands it's been in for a long time. Dangerous people can be elected president. And democracy and republics are so much more fragile than we knew. The ongoing collapsing of those two sources of meaning, both 1.0, the traditional religion, and 2.0, classical liberalism, is leaving a vacuum, says Wheal, a God-shaped hole, a meaning-shaped emptiness in the middle of things. I'm curious, what questions are you struggling with right now? What are the things you're kind of trying to figure out, trying to answer in your own life? What are you wrestling with? Again, I'll monitor the chat as well. People in the room, what's the current question that's really very much present and has you working at it right now?
How do we bridge the divide?
How do we bridge the divide? How to have peaceful relationships. Jenny? How to deal with gun violence. Gwen?
How to feel like I make a difference.
How to feel like I make a difference. Yes. How to keep from being polarizing ourselves, writes Janet. What else? What's the question that's been on your mind and in your heart, even if it's not explicit, but you realize, wow, this is what I'm worried about or trying to find my way through? Anything? Everything you all said, right? Someone in the chat. How to maintain a sense of hope for the future. Growing older and the losses that come with it, writes Marilyn. Jillian asks, how can people I love support the growing fascist white supremacist movement? How to feel safe, says Scotty. How to personally find a way to communicate with those I so fervently disagree with. And why isn't liberalism working? With the collapse of meaning 1.0 and meaning 2.0, as Jamie calls them, and without another kind of anchor available to us to grab onto and steady us, in our heightened human anxiety and fear right now, people are being sucked, on the one hand, toward all kinds of fundamentalisms, on the right and the left, that offer clear and absolute answers. And often with an apocalyptic sense that it's all going to end messily anyway, so we might as well get there as fast as we can so we can usher in the new age that's going to arise on the other side of the collapse. There is really some frightening thought out there about getting quickly to that because that's what we're waiting for anyway. And on the other hand, people are being sucked toward giving up completely. A nihilistic belief that it's all hopeless, it's meaningless, I can't make a difference, it's all for nothing, why bother? Both scary options, especially in some of the hands that are claiming and exploiting them. But we'll suggest that people in the middle who haven't been sucked into one of those two extremes are needing an anchor that keeps the gifts of organized religion, inspiration, healing, connection in particular, keeps those from meaning 1.0, and couples them not with the exclusion that they came with originally, but pairs them with the inclusion from meaning 2.0. We kind of left behind so much of 1.0 to try to get to 2.0. And he says we have to actually integrate the good from each to find the next way forward. Sounds exactly like a job for Unitarian Universalists, doesn't it? Drawing on both lines of our religious heritage, as you heard last Sunday from Reverend Sherry. We were made for this, really. We were made for this, at least in theory. We are human too, and so we have to manage our own fears and anxieties with a dose of humility and an awareness that we are not in complete control. Wheal pulls together a very strong set of recent discoveries about what happens to our bodies and our behaviors when we're facing the kinds of deep and prolonged stresses we've been facing. The one-sentence synopsis of several chapters might be something like this. No matter how intelligent we are, the current stresses on our Paleolithic bodies and nervous systems drive our physiology and our behavior toward perceiving patterns where there are none, toward vengeance, toward immediate rewards, toward impulsive action, toward aggression, toward suspicion and paranoia, aka conspiracy theories, toward hyper-bonding, the same oxytocin that helps us bond in loving ways. If we get a little too much of it, it has us bond like this. Moving us toward rage, that physiological response, toward us and them, toward win-lose. It's not simply about what we're thinking. It's about what our bodies are being primed to perceive and experience and believe. And we're not immune to it. This is another one of those things I find helpful for trying to cultivate my own compassion at this time, or at least for reducing some of my own fear and anger and rage enough not to be immobilized by them. For the most part, QAnon and name your conspiracy here aren't about stupid people with faulty brains, but about people whose level of fear and particular neurochemistry prime them to take on such beliefs, especially when they're being fed a steady stream of misinformation while their fear is being stoked. We're in this soup too. We have our own versions. And the more stressed we are, the more our behaviors are being driven by the oldest part of our neurological survival mechanisms. The more our reptilian brain stems are in control. The wiring in us for things like tolerating difference or for reciprocity-based cooperation, those are much more recent developments in our evolution and much more fragile. So when push comes to shove, it goes to the older, more longer-term options. Our lizard brain is getting the job a lot of the time. So what would help? Wheal has an elaborate plan, or at least a starting draft for reinventing religion and re-architecturing meaning, is the way he puts it, to build meaning 3.0, the next version. To be developed from the bottom up, he says, rather than the top down. Meaning 3.0, he says, needs to couple that deep, newly informed focus on inspiration, healing, and connection, those gifts from organized religion that we hold in our history, with the reach for inclusion that characterizes liberalism and that gave birth to and has anchored our Unitarian Universalist religious heritage. I mean, those are hallmarks that we've claimed as ours all along. Salvation, in other words, that's inclusive, that is transformative, healing, and bonding across a wide range of people and spiritual and theological perspectives. Again, does that sound like a job for Unitarian Universalists or what? It's what we say we are about. But what is underdeveloped for us are new forms of meaning 1.0's great gifts of inspiration, healing, and connection. Wheal offers a lot of ideas and suggestions. Today I'll name that he urges us to start by focusing on embodied experiences of transcendent awe, peak experiences of many kinds, that because of the way they take us beyond our normal experience and our normal emotional and intellectual perception, they get us past the usual noise and remind us what matters. And in the process, they actually recalibrate, reset our off-kilter, overtaxed systems. Especially shared peak experiences, he says. Sharing a peak experience with others can triple its strength. And oh, I'm all in on that one. Invest in shared rituals of healing, of making amends, of atonement that help us digest our grief rather than choke on it, he says. He writes, there's too much tragedy in the human experience to process it all unaided. We need help. So invest in deep, shared rituals of healing for this age. And finally, connect in community, he urges. These social ties and that sense of camaraderie and support are critical to tribal primates like us. We have evolved to participate in community, to forge lasting bonds with others, to help one another, and to share life experiences. We are simply better together, he writes. Isolation is fueling many kinds of pandemics, and at the center of our loneliness is our innate desire to connect. These are indeed some of the strongest and most valuable aspects of organized religion as I have known it, both in the Catholicism of my youth and in Unitarian Universalism. Inspire, heal, connect, while staying open and inclusive, thus integrating the most potent gifts from the histories we UUs hold from our ancestors. Make meaning 3.0, in other words. Like I said, we were made for this. Now, to live into our legacy together, if we can. Jamie Wheal's framing and his urgent call is helping me to get a better handle on the work at hand. It helps me to conceptualize things to move forward. And it so speaks to the longing some of you have been naming to attend here more explicitly and more deeply to our spiritual needs. It speaks to the peak experiences of joy and restoration some of you have found in the drumming circle and the singing meditation circle, and the power of collective worship, just being in the room together. It speaks to the importance of intimate small group sharing in our Soul Matter circles and team meetings. It speaks to the need to move beyond, finally, our total rejection of Christian notions of sinfulness to create new meaningful ways to acknowledge and address that sometimes we miss the mark, that we cause harm, and that we're being harmed, that we honor our need for healing, repair, reconnection, and the meaningful transformation that comes with processing our grief together. It speaks to the power and importance of cultivating community like there's no tomorrow, especially in this era of isolation, no matter how electronic the world gets. And it speaks to the justice component of our community life and values that's so important to so many of you. Justice which is always anchored in that prioritizing of inclusion, in the widening of the circle, the knowing more than ever that yes, we are all in this together. Wheal says that integrating and cultivating with our new awareness the gifts of meaning 1.0 and the gifts of meaning 2.0 is not merely a good and healthy and helpful thing to do. The future of humanity and the earth depends on it, he believes. He may be right. I'll be entertaining and exploring that possibility in conversation with you and with a few other sources of insight. And since meaning 3.0 will need to be built from the ground up, I hope you will explore those possibilities too. Because my friends, if Wheal's right, we are made for this. And now we'll be called to figure out what to do with that. So may we be.
25% of our offering this month will support Sammy's Friends, which offers a safe and caring place for neglected, abandoned, and abused animals to be cared for and rehabilitated when necessary and adopted as quickly as possible into loving homes. We know that our financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. But consider that the funds we gather collectively may do a greater good for ourselves and for the world than they could have done alone. May there be an offering to sustain and grow the life and mission of this congregation. May we give in love and hope. We thank you in advance for your generosity.
Although we're not passing the basket in person, your generosity remains essential to our ability to sustain the work of our community. There are several ways to contribute. You may text an amount to 833-579-0483, give via our website at uugrassvalley.org, via PayPal at paypal.me/UUCM, or mail to UUCM 246 South Church Street, Grass Valley, California, 95945. Thank you.
I wish it was easy, this living day by day. I wish it was easy. No one showed me the way. They made the world so hard, it's true. Everyone judging everything I do. I wish it was easy, but it ain't. I wish it was easy, working hard to make ends meet. I wish it was easy, still living week by week. I try to stay focused to my dreams, keep getting lost in the get-rich schemes. I wish it was easy, but it ain't. I wish it was easy, but it just keeps getting harder every day. I wish it was easy, gotta roll the dice and now we've gotta play. I wish it was easy. I wish it was easy, like it was back in the day. I wish it was easy, when all we had to do was pray. World stopped cold when the atoms split. Genie's out, get a bottle quick. I wish it was easy, but it ain't. I wish it was easy, living with uncertainty. I wish it was easy, toss a coin, call it free. It's hard to grow in the man I want to be. Well, the cold hard facts just can't go back to the way things used to be. I wish it was easy. I know you've been thinking too. If you're like me, you haven't got a clue. I wish it was easy, growing old and obsolete. I wish it was easy, and I'm still feeling incomplete. Try to stand up for what I need, not what I deserve, not a man agreed. I wish it was easy, but it ain't. I wish it was easy, it just keeps getting harder every day. I wish it was easy, God rolled the dice and now we've got to play. I wish it was easy. I know you've been thinking too. If you're like me, you haven't got a clue. If you're like me, you ain't trying to be sane. Oh, I wish it was easy, but it ain't.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you for inspiring our energy today with that wonderful song. And we dedicate these offerings today to the spirit of our collective community. For together, we create a force for good, honesty, hope, and spirit to make the world a better place. And like our Reverend says, the time is good and we can do it. Thank you all again for your generosity.
Tom, thank you for a toe-tapping version of We're Clueless. And it ain't easy. Thank you. Chuck, thank you for serving as a worship associate this morning. Beth for being such our steady chat host there. Siobhan and Gary and Bob, thanks for being here this morning. Thanks to Shanti for, again, the beautiful, beautiful setting. This is Shanti for those who don't know and who are in the room. Jordan and Tom, thanks for the music very, very much. And Jenny, thanks for the reading, and Robin and Scotty, Carmen for greeting this morning too, and Corey and George for working behind the scenes. And for all who cleaned up yesterday, anybody who's in the room or online who wants to wave a hand, said you were part of that cleanup yesterday? Yeah, there's a noticeable difference, thank you. I really appreciated that. Our closing song just says what it needs to say. Life calls us on. If you got the CD from last year, you'll know this one. I invite you to hum, dance along. I invite those in the room to rise in body or in spirit, if you so choose, for life calls us on.
Here in reverence now we gather for the blessings we have known, with the pledge to one another that we journey not alone. Joy and sorrow makes us wise, kin to all that lives and dies. Life calls us on, love calls us on. Words and deeds of those before us waken here to keep us strong. Blend our voices in the chorus of creation's living song. Courage bids us lift our eyes upward to the shining skies. Hope calls us on. Hope calls us on. Loyal guides in love and duty lead us with a trusted light. Blessed are they whose inward beauty shows the path of truth aright. Honor is their earthly prize. By their work we realize faith calls us on. Faith calls us on. we have shared a radiant hour when the truth has made us free, and the Spirit's gracious power dreamed of good that yet shall be. Light the path before us lies. Joyful pilgrims now we rise. Life calls us on. Life calls us on. Life calls us on. Life calls us on.
Amen, as Tom said. For closing words, I want to invite us to hear again the opening words. I so often hear them differently at the end of the service. So I invite you to think about it as this space and time, but also beyond. Come, let us enter this space of hope and community. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion, and compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space present to the beloved companions who move beside us. Come into this space mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space. I invite people in the room to look around at each other, catch each other's eyes, greet each other before we do our community benediction. If you're online, I invite you to turn your cameras on so you can see some others, again, as we prepare to offer this community benediction, which reminds us that we are linked, that we are connected, and that we are in motion together. So together, let us carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again.